Okay, it's time for some, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but, in kind of loose but semi-serious conspiracy talk. Today, there was a terror attack at the U.S. Capitol. A guy ran over a couple of Capitol police officers. One of them is dead. The guy who died is a white male. The suspect, who got out of his car and charged at some other cops with a knife, was shot and killed. He was non-white, he was black, but he was a big follower of the Nation of Islam. And I find that interesting because we just had a terror attack by a Muslim. We don't know if he was religiously motivated, but that shooting in Colorado was perpetrated against all white Americans by a Syrian immigrant who was practicing Muslim. And now here, less than 2 weeks later, we have this Nation of Islam guy come and plow down a couple of cops in Washington. At the vaunted Capitol, our great temple of democracy, as the cultists, would refer to it. And this to me just seems a bit suspicious because, when Obama was president, we would get occasionally these Muslim terror attacks. These Muslim guys that come out and they would commit some terrorist act, and the Democrats would go, oh, we need gun control, although in this case there wasn't a gun involved, and the Republicans would come out and say, no, we need Muslim control. And it was weird that we had so many of these Muslim terror attacks during the Obama administration, it seemed, and then for the last 4 years under Trump there were none. It just didn't happen. And I'm not going to buy into some BS thing like, well, they were scared of Trump. That's why those muzzies didn't want to go killing us. But it seemed like we still had, these so-called lone wolf terror attacks, but they were being perpetrated by these white males, by these right-wingers. And it seems like the pattern I'm detecting here, and I'm not going to say that that this is by design, but the pattern I'm detecting is that the terror attacks keep happening in this country, and the perpetrator seems to be something, the identity of the perpetrator, the ideals of the perpetrator, is something that seems to be, inconvenient for whichever party controls the White House. In other words, the Democrats are supposed to be the party who is friendlier to Muslims, although I don't think that's true. They were just as bad as the Republicans as far as, if you're talking about bombing brown people in the Middle East. I mean, the Democrats have not let up on that at all. Certainly not under Obama, and certainly not now under Joe Biden. But their reputation amongst the Republicans, was the Republicans thought they were soft on muzzies. That was the big issue. That's why people said, oh, Obama, he might be a closeted Muslim because he's so nice to the Muslims. He just doesn't, he hasn't murdered enough of them over there in the Middle East. He hasn't started enough new wars. And, then magically and so the terror attacks back then, would energize with, I guess, except, there was the exception of, Dylan Roof. Okay, so I can think of two specific, Adam Lanza and Sandy Hook, and then you had Dylan Roof. Okay, so there were a couple of your lone wolf right wingers back in the Obama administration, but generally speaking, they were muzzies, and that would energize the opposition to Obama. And similarly, during the Trump administration, we had all these white guys that were committing terror attacks, and that would energize the Democrats because they would say, "Oh, look at all this," and they always would tout these funny statistics about how the likelihood of being killed by a white male terrorist is astronomical in this country. And, the ideology of these guys was not exactly consistent, so they kind of brushed past that part and just focused on, they're white guys. Ah! Even though, white men, or, along with white women, would be one of the biggest demographics in the country, so just from a statistical standpoint, I mean, yeah, I guess they would commit a lot of the murders in this country if you don't control for population size. And this energized the left. But now, all of a sudden, we have a Democrat president in power. And yes, we had one white guy go out there. I guess he was a sex addict, is what the facts seem to be, and he wanted to go murder these women at these happy ending massage parlors who were, I guess in his view, enabling his sex addiction. Some kind of, obviously, mentally disturbed person, as all of these guys are. But since then now, we've had two terrorists who were, neither of which were white, and who were tied to Islam in some way. And in the case of this current guy today at the Capitol, tied to the Nation of Islam and Louis Farrakhan, a long-running boogeyman for talk radio and the right, and for obvious reasons. Farrakhan is a black Muslim who doesn't like Jews in Israel, so he's kind of an easy boogeyman for your ordinary right-winger in this country, at least your ordinary traditional right-winger. And so I just find it odd that now all of a sudden we're getting terrorists that sort of confirm the biases of right-wingers. Now that there's a Democrat in office, it's an odd pattern. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily the CIA or the FBI or the Intel folks agitating these people more enough, because I've talked about in the past about how you have the tactics that the Intel folks use, that at the FBI in particular use to entrap people who they want to accuse of being attempted terrorists. They will essentially radicalize people online and then try and goad them into committing an act of terror, and then when they finally are about to go through with it, the FBI swoops in and saves the day and says, yay, we averted a terrorist attack. And they don't tell you that attack is something that they were facilitating themselves and never would have happened without CIA involvement or FBI involvement. Anyway, so it's they're essentially they're creating a crisis, and then they're swooping in to prevent the crisis. And then I think that if there are many cases like that, well, then what about the cases where the FBI does that and the guy goes and commits the act and the FBI doesn't catch him in time? I think that there's a lot of cases like that. And so I have talked about the role that I think that these folks probably, because they wouldn't tell us, they're not going to be transparent with it, but the role that I think that a lot of these folks might play in facilitating terrorist attacks, and how you might be seeing more terrorist attacks in a certain group because that's where the FBI is focusing their entrapment efforts. So in other words, when the FBI gets it in their head that, oh, we got to watch out for terrorist attacks from X group of people, well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then the FBI is going out looking for people who they can try and entrap in terror plots, and so they end up, inspiring people on the internet who are parts of these groups that they're targeting, whether it be white men or Muslims or something like that. They inspire them to go and, commit acts of terror. And so I find it odd because, I was saying, well, back in the Bush and Obama years, the Intel folks were very clearly worried about Muslim terrorists. They were worried about blowback from the war on terror over in the Middle East, and so they wanted to make sure, they were going after Muslims here. And I think that led to, a lot of accidental, let's just assume that they're accidents. I don't want to go so far as to say that, although I wouldn't put it past them, but I don't know for a fact that they intentionally let any folks commit terrorist acts. But it seemed like for a long time they were focused on Muslims, and so you had a lot of Muslim terror attacks. And then for starting the Trump years, all of a sudden they were concerned with white supremacy, and so you started seeing all these white guys going out and committing terrorist acts, even though a couple of them seem to be overtly left-wing. In the case of the Vegas shooter and the Republican baseball team shooter guy. I mean, that guy, worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign. And so in those cases, I wouldn't suspect Intel community involvement necessarily. Although, the Vegas stuff is very suspicious because they never told us very much about him. So taking this all into consideration, judging by the events of today, I don't think that this is a part of any broader pattern. I think that in this case, because when you have a guy, running his car into two Capitol police officers, and it's a black guy associated with the Nation of Islam, just based on his social media posts, I'm more inclined to believe that this is just a one-off guy who went crazy, not somebody who was necessarily being entrapped by the FBI or some other police agency, because I don't think that they are really that concerned about the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam has been allowed to operate in this country for many decades. Louis Farrakhan, until not too long ago, still had a Twitter account. He was a blue check mark. And this again, it's not something that really fits into any of the political narratives. And because I don't think it's a coincidence all the time when you have shooting after shooting that fits into the political narrative of one political faction or another. But this just doesn't seem to be one of those cases. Now, I guess the right would want to hype this up because, we're supposed to, we're being told now by the media that, all we have to worry about is white supremacist terrorism. And so in order to defend, and by white supremacists, they of course mean normal Republican voter. The Republicans have an incentive to try and hype up this particular case because it's an act of terror committed by someone who is obviously not, your run-of-the-mill white redneck Republican. And as we know, because this is a non-white terrorist who is not acting, in the interest of Donald Trump or something, this terror attack will be swept under the bus. What they're trying to do here is just focus on the fact that a Capitol police officer died and say, wow, a Capitol police officer died just like January the 6th. What a hero. We must protect our temple of democracy. And this is why, days like this are just remind us of that terrible, awful day of January 6th. And so they clearly don't want to talk about the, in this case, the assailant or his motives or anything like that. And so I expect that this will, by Monday, be a total non-story. I mean, it's a Friday anyway. Not a big news day. Friday is where, news stories go to die. If you want something to not get covered, release it on a Friday. You always have the Friday afternoon news dump. Well, here's a part of it. Oh, we had a non-white terrorist attack. So I think that's about all I have to say on the matter, and I'll see you folks later.